Hi, my name is Jordan Marshall, and I'm sorry, my screen just flashed there, which was a great way to start. I'll start that again. Hi, my name is Jordan Marshall, and I'm the Chief Reporter at Building and Building Design. And we're really happy to be bringing you this webinar today in conjunction with Haines Watts. So today's session is all about how UK construction businesses can fuel growth by releasing trapped cash. And I'm really excited to be able to be part of it because we've already had a lot of interest in it. So it's going to be a good one, I'm sure. I'm joined by Matthew Thorpe and Jonathan Scott, both from Haines Watts, who are going to run us through today's discussion. As always, our sessions are available free and on demand. So if there's things you want to go back and look at, you want to pass the link on to another colleague or someone else who you think will enjoy the content, please feel free to do so. It'll be the same link that you've used to join just now, and it will be available within 30 minutes of the session concluding this afternoon. I guess that's it from me, except please do send through your questions at any time during the presentation. We'll do the Q&A at the end, but we welcome questions to come through as and when they come to you. So please send them through, and I'm sure it'll be a great session. So I'll hand over to Matthew now, and then we'll hear from Jonathan afterwards.
Thanks, Jordan. So I'm Matthew Thorpe. I'm the managing partner of the Haines Watts Essex office. Haines Watts is a top 15 firm of accountants, tax and business advisors. We specialise in supporting owner-managed businesses. Personally, construction and built environment makes up more than 70% of my client portfolio. So I'm lucky enough to see firsthand the unique challenges that the sector faces. Now, the aim of today is to offer you some insight into some opportunities that exist to bolster cash and strengthen your balance sheet. Now, clearly, cash and a strong balance sheet have always been something that is key to success in the construction sector, but in my view, never more so than right now. After what's certainly been an unprecedented 18 months living through COVID, which obviously came hot on the heels of Brexit, I think the risks and the opportunities for all businesses in the sector are both higher than ever. I'm sure nobody in this room would argue with the fact that construction can, at times, be a hostile sector, with all parties in the chain often feeling squeezed from above or below, or both, depending on where you sit. But at this moment, we're seeing this really pushed to the extreme in so many cases. I think we've had, obviously, so many issues, huge increases in price and shortage of supply of core materials, steel in particular, earlier in the year, seeing huge increases in labour rates for lots of trades that's putting pressure on margin. We've seen lead times on projects stretching wider and wider, kick-offs being delayed, projects being mothballed altogether. And I think for many of us, for many of you guys, that's meant trying to price projects that won't start for months, where the costings are uncertain, where the timings are unclear, positioning site teams is almost impossible more than a couple of months in advance. And then sitting on top of that, you've got end users who are clearly under pressure themselves in the current climate. And certainly what I've been seeing is that far from taking a more collaborative approach, often they're refusing any kind of material fluctuation clauses and in fact trying to load even more risk onto the main contractor, which obviously is then passing its way through the entire chain. So I think, adding to the tough trading conditions that all presents, we've also had a significant tightening in the bond market, a big increase in use of credit references throughout the supply chain for construction projects, the introduction of domestic reverse charge, which clearly for some main contractors has been a big bonus, but actually it stripped really vital working capital out of a number of subcontractors. So for me, I think taking all these factors, plus the many others that I haven't touched on, into account, even by construction standards, I think it's a time where cash and balance sheet strength are really paramount. Strong cash reserves can be the difference between, having to chase turnover at low margin or being able to be selective. It can be the difference between being able to self-fund a project rather than having to factor and incur those extra fees and interest. It can strengthen your negotiating position, give you the chance to drive costs down by working with early settlement offers. give you the confidence to hold out in final account negotiations, knowing that actually going through an adjudication process might not bankrupt you. I'm sure that you can all think of a multitude of other reasons why boosting cash in the business, strengthening the balance sheet would be an advantage, even if it's just helping you sleep better at night. And I think finally, as we start to look forward, there's no doubt that the strongest are set to thrive, and bolstering your cash position, reducing your tax liabilities, inevitably strengthens your balance sheet, which in turn is going to make securing bonds easier. It's going to make you a better prospect for end users when they're completing their due diligence, and ultimately it's going to give others throughout that supply chain the confidence to work with you. So on that note, I'll pass over to John for the interesting bit to talk you through some good ways of doing that, releasing that cash.
Thanks, Matt. So before we start, I thought I would give some background in terms of what we're actually going to look at today. The main areas which I'm sure all of you have heard about or seen in the press, or definitely with competitors or clients of yours. Research and development relief is one of the key areas. Patent box is very new to the market, hasn't been around as long as R&D or research and development tax relief, but it is one of the biggest tax benefits that a company can get themselves into, and we'll sort of explore about how you might get yourself into that tax relief as well. Capital allowances, obviously the budget brought in the super deduction, we'll explore a little bit about that. And also land remediation relief. Land remediation relief has been around for a long time. There was rumours a while ago that the government was going to remove this relief. However, they've sat behind it, and it's a relief whereby, especially for those property development companies and also the companies doing the remediation work, can work collaboratively together to create the best form of relief, which will or which can turn some sites from being a non-starter to actually possible now. Also, I'm sure everyone's aware, the corporation tax rate is rising, so we've got until the 1st of April 2023 to make use of the super deduction. There is no time limits on any of the others, so research and development relief is still very much at the forefront of the UK government's mind to improve efficiencies. Patent box is there to increase our intellectual property base, and capital allowances is the key one there. That is a time limit, and again, it's a case of making use while it's there, because the AIA relief, which everyone has used for a number of years, is also coming down. So in terms of R&D tax credits, everyone has their own opinion of what R&D tax credits are, what qualifies, what doesn't qualify. However, the HMRC definition is that it takes place when a project seeks to achieve an advance in science or technology. And that has always been the legislation, that has always been the party line from HMRC. And it's how your business might be doing these activities, maybe within its day-to-day business, that you would like to try and explore or pull out to be able to claim R&D relief. And this relief has sort of snowballed in prior years, and last year it was 3.5 billion of cash that actually was repaid by the UK government, and that's been compounded every year for the last 5 years at least. But because of that, there has been some changes in the R&D relief. HMRC has employed over 150 new inspectors in the last 12 months alone to fight anti-avoidance. So there is a lot of anti-avoidance in R&D. And unfortunately, software and construction is in their line of sight. It's high on their agenda. We've seen an increased level of inquiries into construction company claims, but that's not to say anyone listening in should be put off from claiming what is rightfully theirs. And it's all to do with, is the company looking to advance in that science or technology field? And that can be overcoming technological challenges within site constraints, new methods of construction. It could also be looking at new products and using existing products in a new way. So there's all manner of things within construction which actually do lend themselves to R&D, But what we are now trying to develop is more of a methodology and evidence base that you can prove this to HMRC. In the past, what has been allowable is that we can have these arguments using competent professionals, which you are in the field of construction. But now HMRC is saying, well, can you show us the evidence? Can you demonstrate that this knowledge isn't already out there? And that's something that a lot of clients are looking to try and improve upon, and certainly coming to ourselves to help with. So in R&D, there's two schemes. Not a lot of people know there's two schemes. There's one which is the SME, which is the big ticket one, and there's one which is the large company scheme. So the large company scheme, which is referred to as the RDEC, effectively is a tax credit payable of 13% of the qualifying costs. So what we would do is we would quantify what R&D qualifying costs the company is undertaken in each financial year, and then HMRC would say we've got a tax credit of 13% of that. And what they don't say is they actually tax you on that 13%, which seems a bit strange. The actual the effective rate is less than 13%. And that's aside from the SME relief, which is the enhanced deduction. So if we spend £100,000 or £1 million, HMRC is going to give us an additional 130,000 or 1.3 million against our profits. And under that scenario, we can also create a tax credit if our R&D claim is larger than our profit. So quite clearly, SME relief is the better relief. It's a state aid, and that's the relief that everyone is rushed into. That's the one that you want to get yourselves into. But because of recent changes and because of a couple of tax cases, more and more construction businesses are now going to fall foul of the SME relief and end up being in the large company scheme, which is still relevant. It's still beneficial rather than having nothing. But every construction business needs to start looking at their claims more often than not. If you're entering into a contract with a developer, or you are under an obligation to provide services to someone else for a payment, then you are actually going to fall back into the large company scheme, not the SME relief. And underneath there, I've put what constitutes as an SME turnover, and still in euros, 100 million euro turnover, balance sheet of 86 million, and less than 500 full-time employees. Now that turnover and balance sheet and staff is all group. So if you have a large group, then you have to take all into account when looking at this relief. What qualifies as the costs? So largest costs mainly in construction are employees and subcontractors. Materials tend not to be a large element anymore, unless you are building large prototypes and scrapping those. You can't sell them on. We used to be able to sell them on and still claim the tax relief, but we can't anymore. So employee costs and subcontractors are the key ones. And externally provided work, are those that are it can be provided by umbrellas, but effectively they would be an employee if they weren't running themselves through maybe their own personal service company, which again, the IR35 changes may have moved you away from that practice anyway. The main difference on the subcontractor's route, and it can massively affect all construction company claims, is if you fall into the large company scheme, you aren't allowed to claim any subcontract costs in your claim. So that can take an R&D claim from a couple of million down to 100,000, 150,000 quite quickly if your business is mainly built up of subcontractors and you're being paid or under a contract to provide that work or that R&D work. So it's imperative to set out the parameters in your R&D claim, demonstrate that the work is being done at your own cost, your own risk, and that any payments to or from your client for other areas fall outside the scope of the R&D. And that's something that we will see more inquiries into in the next 12 months, 24 months, and we'll see more cases going to tribunal on that. I've put some examples of qualifying activity. Again, in terms of construction, everything is moving forward. Again, we've got the new net zero carbon requirements, so that is going to cause some problems for a lot of people in construction to try and get down to those rates, and therefore we are going to have to try and redevelop tried and tested methods and materials and construction methods again to try and hit these targets. And by going into the unknown, effectively that would be getting your business into the R&D relief. And it's then a case of quantifying the exposure, the cost, and quantifying the level of relief and which relief you can claim. Now, HMRC is repaying or currently repaying SME reliefs within 28 days, which is a massive turnaround time for them. So if we put a claim in for a backdated claim, you'll get your refund within 28 days, as long as everything is in agreement with the legislation, and HMRC are happy with that. So that is one way that you may never have claimed R&D before. You may have claimed R&D in the past, but you may want to go back and revisit it. There may be some additional costs, some additional projects which qualify. And having a second pair of eyes looking at those claims can always generate an additional increase in the level of cash flow coming into the business. You can go back 2 years and you can have numerous reiterations of your CT600 if you want. Less is better, but quite clearly, if you are due some more tax or some more cash flow back from previous years because you've underclaimed, then you want to go back and rectify that. Again, I'll not go through this, but this is just a case study, and this was a construction business that we worked with. They hadn't claimed before. They went back before the deadlines, claimed what was due to them, split the claims between RDEC, SME, and they were repaid pretty quickly. One area which is unknown, or very, very much on the low side, is patent box or patent box, whichever way you want to call it. Patent box, in a nutshell, will become more at the forefront of everyone's mind, especially when the tax rate goes up, because effectively, if you can get yourself into a patent box position, your profits that are made on the patent box are only subject to 10% UK corporation tax, as opposed to potentially 25 in 2 years' time. So it's a massive benefit to getting into this relief. And a lot of companies, a lot of SMEs, a lot of OMBs, unmanaged businesses, sorry, tend to have stayed away from patents because of the negativity around the cost, the application of patents, how much it would cost to litigate against someone on a patent. And we can see that in the numbers, 1,300 companies claimed relief under the patent box, but I believe it was only about 50 was actually construction. And it's a shame, because the actual value of relief is into the billions now, and it will continue to rise year on year. We've seen a massive increase in companies applying for patents, because the mindset of patents now is that the relief is such that it might cost £10,000 to get a patent and a couple of £100 each year to maintain it if we're only looking for a UK patent. And the relief can be into the millions per annum. And I can go through a case study in a bit in the next slides just to demonstrate that. But basically what you'd be looking for is to patent a process, a product, a fixing, a screw, anything that your design teams have come up with that you then put into your schemes or your buildings going forward. And the argument then would be that without the patented product within the overall envelope of the building wouldn't effectively be built, and therefore the full building or your full profit would qualify for 10% as opposed to 25% tax. And the beauty about patent box and the relief before that I've just mentioned, R&D, they work together in tandem. They aren't one or the other. Therefore, your patent box could take out a large chunk of profit, and the R&D could take out the remaining profit. So therefore, using both will save a massive amount of tax. Who qualifies for patent box relief? Very much similar to R&D. It's a UK tax. Therefore, they want a UK company liable, or a company liable to UK tax. You could have an overseas company, but actually it's still subject to UK tax because it's owned and managed in the UK, and therefore that could still claim patent box and also R&D relief. Must own the IP or exclusive license. So the exclusive license is an area where a lot of my clients are exploiting now, especially in concrete or precast construction, whereby you might have an exclusive license to use a certain mix and someone else has got the patent. That's fine. You can claim the patent box relief because you've got that UK exclusive license. And those sorts of arrangements, especially in groups where you don't want patents in different subsidiaries, then you can then start using exclusive licenses to extrapolate the tax relief across the group itself. quick example. So again, using a building example, so a facade. So if we painted a really small, or we painted and designed a fixing, you could use any fixing, but we've designed our own because we think it's a bit novel. It works better with our products. So we patent that. Again, it could cost, depending on what type of patents, it could cost 2,000 or it could cost 10,000, somewhere in between those ranges, and it could take around about 2 years to get through. If we do that, then effectively there's a patent pending period, which is what I've mentioned there. Our relief will start accruing. We don't get it until the patent is effectively granted, but we still are accruing that tax relief. So the cash might still be trapped at this point, but it will eventually come good once we get that grant. So in this scenario, the fixing in a large scale building facade is, it's pretty negligible, sorry, in terms of the actual cost. However, if that goes into the products, then effectively any profit that, if we sold the fixings by themselves on, we would get patent box relief on that. But we're not going to. That's not going to be the big win for some of yourselves on here. If you put the fixing into some of your products or your systems or your panels or your facade, then the argument is that the full facade would qualify for patent box relief. Therefore, instead of just the profit on the fixing, you've got the profit on the full entire product itself. And then, as people might, a good example is Apple. If you build your facade that it can only use your fixing, even if you don't supply the fixing, then the facade, even without fixings supplied, would qualify for patent box relief. Not many people do that because you do shrink your market, but it just shows that just from one little fixing, in this scenario, you could have a full facade system, or even a building, depending on the methodology which you run with HMRC, qualifying for patent box relief, and therefore the numbers start to really ramp up in terms of patent box. We had a client who did this. The R&D relief saves them a couple £100,000 a year because they're always developing new facades, new panels. However, the patent box relief saves them around about 1.2 million of cash per annum, because it all goes on turnover and profit, as opposed to R&D that goes on cost. Therefore, you've got the two working in perfect harmony in that situation. Land remediation relief. So again, land remediation relief is you could say it's an underutilized relief. It was only 1,300 claims last year. The problem with land remediation relief for some construction businesses is that you are doing the remediation work. You're doing a lot of the work to get the ground back to a usable state. However, you need to own the land, and it's that link between who has the land, how long the lease is, because you can claim land remediation relief if you have a certain length of lease. But it can, if you have that relationship between developer and construction business, then if everyone is on the same page, then we can expand the relief such that all the costs, eligible costs from remediating that site, even down to the fencing, someone on site because the land is unsafe, all these auxiliary costs which are on the peripheries of what remediation, because it's not the actual remediation work itself, will still qualify. But what you would want is both companies working in tandem so that the invoicing, the paper trail is correct. And that's something that we work with our clients, our property clients and our remediation clients on, just to make sure that the tax relief is being maximized for whoever is claiming it. And also it does allow for sites to be appraised. So where a site may become unviable because of the contamination, if we then start running the numbers in terms of factoring in any R&D that needs to be done on site, any land remediation relief which is going to be claimed, then the site may then become a lot more viable because of this tax relief and this injection of cash from HMRC. The rules around land remediation relief must be located in the UK, as opposed to the other two. The company just has to be subject to UK tax. Acquired to carry out its trade. So there was a tax case just recently. There's not many tax cases on land remediation relief, but there was a tax case recently whereby HMRC won that it wasn't part of the trade. It was bought to actually do the remediation on, and then effectively use that just to get the cash or the tax benefit from HMRC, and therefore there is this rule that is it part of the trade? Is it something that that business does as its day-to-day? And that's something that hadn't been tested before. It's been tested now, and again, it's just drawing the line in the sand in terms of, are we buying this just for tax relief, or is it part of the actual business plan itself? There's some anti-avoidance whereby if we say there's a bit of contaminated land, we got that for £1 because the local authority can't find someone to renovate it or remediate it, sorry, then effectively we're buying it at an undervalue, and therefore the relief will be restricted because of that undervalue. We're getting it for very little, but we're actually going to get a hell of a lot of tax relief from HMRC for doing it. And there's some anti-avoidance to say, well, they will look at what that market value of the property would have been. What is it eligible for? So staff costs, any of the team on site, any materials, so any materials that you have to take off, preliminary work, so site scrapes, subcontracted work, again, if you are subcontracting the work to another construction remediation company, and you're doing some yourself, you can claim all those costs, capping levels to provide a barrier. These are only just high-level examples. The eligibility of the relief radiates out from all of these, so there's so much more eligible, but it's a case-by-case basis and it's a site-by-site basis. It depends on what site we're looking at. Is it near the old steelworks? Then steel will obviously be an issue, as opposed to looking at somewhere in the northeast where there was arsenic in the ground. So it all depends on site by site, and the cost will be totally different depending on which one we look at. But again, land mediation relief, R&D, patent box, they can all work jointly together. It's not one or the other. The only thing I would say is you can't get the relief for every pound you spend. You can't get relief from land mediation and R&D on that same pound. If it's a case of that pound is split, 60 pence in the pound is for R&D, 40 pence in the pound is for land remediation, then that's the way in which you would use the reliefs together, as opposed to trying to say, well, that pound is a pound in R&D and a pound in land remediation. That can't be done. Again, this is an example. So what is the actual relief? So for every £100,000 or for every pound you spend on land remediation relief, the government will give you an extra 50%. So effectively it uplifts your costs to 150% as opposed to 100%. So very much like the super deduction, which we'll come on to talk about. But this is a revenue expenditure and a fixed asset expenditure. So it doesn't matter if you are holding it doesn't matter if you're holding your properties, if you're a property developer, in stock, or if you're holding them in investment assets or fixed assets, you still get the same relief. It's just the timing of the reliefs. You only get the relief if it's sitting in stock when you sell it, as opposed to fixed assets, you get it when it's incurred. Capital allowances and super deduction. So again, there's been a lot of talk about super deduction. There's been a lot of talk about capital allowances. Capital allowances in the past have been well documented. There's a lot of case law on what can and can't qualify for capital allowances. And I'm sure everyone on this call has seen capital allowances at some point. Whether or not everyone's truly getting the most out of their capital allowances is something else, because every time there's a capital project, what you want to be doing is you want to be sitting down with your surveyor or your tax advisor and going line by line on those project plans and allocating what will qualify for capital allowances, what won't, and if there's some grey matter, then working through the legislation to say, right, well, can some of that go into qualifying, can it not? Because capital allowance is a massive tax benefit for businesses that are actually investing in plant machinery and also building commercial properties. What I want to do here is just to go over what capital allowances are, because effectively the super deduction just falls behind the plant machinery and special rate pool. Everything else we can also discuss, but the plant machinery, equipment, office equipment, tooling, That is your standard plant machinery which you would expect to be in there. It also is the likes of well, vans. Again, there was a lot of discussion as to whether cars would qualify, but cars have got their own special rate pool, so they fall outside the scope. We've got special rate pool, which is the integral features of a building. Again, those of you that are commercial property developers, you'll be well aware of this. But for those of you that have your own buildings that you're working from, you can still go and do a retrospective capital allowance claim. So if you are sitting in a building which you haven't looked at capital allowance claim on before, you can then go back and retrospectively look at any capital allowances which are unclaimed within the fabric of your building. You can then put a claim in now and get relief for that now. So there is no time limit on that. So that's something you can sort of take away from that, and that will create a tax benefit or cash inflow for the business. The annual investment allowance is the other side of the coin. So the annual investment allowance has been around for a while. It's been £1 million for a while, and for a lot of businesses, £1 million been ample. Therefore, the super deduction, yes, it was great. It's a timing, but the AIA has always been there as well. That is obviously going to come down, so that is going to create a bit of a problem when that does come down, and the super deduction then runs out. So the idea behind everyone rushing to effectively put in orders for assets that are going to qualify for the super deduction is valid. However, the big warning sign is cash flow. If the cash flow of the business isn't going to take it, then don't let the tax sort of push the commerciality of the business in that direction. There is other reliefs, as we've discussed, that the company can access, and therefore use those first, because those are costs which the company is actually still doing on a day-to-day basis. It's not like you have to go out and spend more money to go get those reliefs. Land remediation, the R&D, the patent box, yes, there might be a small cost up front, but then once that cost is expended, you get the relief going forward. All those costs are on an annual basis. You are spending them anyway. All you are doing is highlighting those costs and claiming that back from HMRC. Capital allowance is different. You actually have to then go and buy an asset, and to get the super deduction, it has to be a new asset, and that obviously comes with its own problems in terms of cash flow. And that's always been my word of warning when this was announced and they were making a big push on the super deduction. It is a great relief to have because there is no upper limit like the annual investment allowance, so we can spend as much as we want in as short a time frame as we want within this 2-year window. However, it's all down to cash flow, and obviously coming out the back of COVID, cash flow has always been key to the survivability of businesses such as yourselves. So in terms of the super deduction, it's an extra 130% in terms of what we spend. So if we spend 100,000 or £1 million in this example, we get another, the uplift on top of that. The AIA allowance obviously went up to £1 million and then dropped off. There is the SR allowance, which is a 50% first year allowance. Those are for those integral features. But what you would want to have a look at when we are looking at a full schedule of capital allowances for any business, we want to use the best reliefs to create the biggest impact now. Therefore, we would use the super deduction. Anything that would fall into the SR allowance, which is the 50% allowance. If we have still got the annual investment allowance unused, we would use that first because you get 100% relief in year one using the AIA. So you wouldn't really want to touch the SR allowance, the 50% first year allowance, because it just doesn't make sense. So we use super deduction, AIA, and then we go into the 50% if we need to. And again, it's all down to carving up what qualifies as plant machinery super deduction and what is non-qualifying as a capital allowance, because it has to qualify as a capital allowance to get us into this relief anyway. I've also put, again, just some examples of what qualifies, not cars but vans. There's been a lot of companies I'm seeing with Defenders at the moment. They are classed as a commercial vehicle. Again, I'm not going to go through this, but it's all about using these reliefs, using the advice, using your surveyors if you've got surveyors as well, or if not, get some external surveyors in or your tax advisor in going through line by line and trying to identify what the spend is. You can do this before you spend it. Very clearly, you've got project plans, you can go through these. Also, you can have a look at finance options, because finance is going to be key. One big area of warning is leases. You have to own the asset. It has to be new to qualify. There has been a big push to get this changed, whereby on big civil projects that you might not need certain machinery for a long period of time, but it's still an expensive thing to buy in. Again, that hasn't been pushed through the Finance Act, unfortunately. For those that have commercial properties that lease them out to tenants, that was left out of the Finance Act previously, but that has now come back in, and it's working its way through Parliament. So that's great news for those individuals, those companies. We'll open up the questions, but again, because I've gone over a number of tax reliefs, and quite clearly each tax relief you could spend an hour just delving into the tax relief, delving into each company's different scenarios, different ideas. It's been quite condensed, but it's to try and give an overview as to these are all these 4 reliefs that the construction industry should be claiming. You want them all working together in harmony. You don't want each of them fighting each other. But quite clearly, if you aren't using one of them, then it would be a case of sitting down and saying, well, why aren't we using one of them? And there might be a genuine reason why you aren't, but quite clearly the tax benefit of not using one of these and the cash flow benefit of not using one of these can be detrimental to the business. So I think we can open it up to questions.
Yeah, I think that was a great overview of where people should be looking, and I've already got a number of questions that I want to ask, but I think maybe a really good way to kick things off, and we have had a couple of questions asking, yes, available on demand, so you can go back and check any bits that you want to. It'll be available via the same link you joined this afternoon, and it's available free. So if you want to pass it on to somebody else in your team as well, that's completely fine. Please do send through your questions. We're keen to get them involved. But to kick things off, I thought it might be good to just sort of ask, that was a lot of information for everybody. So I thought it might be good to ask each of you to sort of like highlight maybe your 3 key points on the topic that you think everyone should be at the forefront of their mind before we get into this discussion too deep. Matt, do you want to go first, considering you went first before?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, the biggest thing that I see when I'm working with clients around particularly the research and development and the patent box is people are often very doubtful whether or not what they do actually, to most of my clients, what they do every day is just their day-to-day. It's their bread and butter. To them, it doesn't feel like something that when people talk about research and development and patent box, I think it immediately brings to mind, you know, science, tech industries, things that are, you know, very, very purposely complicated and convoluted. And actually, in reality, the vast majority of the construction businesses that I work for are on a daily basis taking on huge design risk, are having to re-engineer things, readapt the way that things apply. So I think the biggest point for me is look at your own business and your own day-to-day activities with eyes wide open. It's so easy to just convince yourself that, well, you know, no, we do the same thing on every project, and the reality is you don't. Every project is unique, every project is different, and it's that expertise, those skills in overcoming obstacles that mean that in the vast majority of cases there are tax reliefs that exist to, you know, to support you through that.
Brilliant. Jonathan, did you have some thoughts?
Yeah, I think in terms of these tax reliefs, clients have typically stayed away from them because there's that fear of it can't be free money, and that's been a big issue, and the awareness has increased over the past number of years, but there's still that skepticism of HMRC and something being too good to be true. Now, one of my key sort of health warnings, though, is sometimes the information out there on, especially R&D at the minute, it will filter through in terms of super deduction and land mediation. In terms of R&D, there's quite a lot of miscommunication on R&D, what qualifies, what doesn't. And there's been a couple of cases, especially in construction, where things have gone a bit awry. And sometimes in those situations, get a second opinion from another, if you need to, from another R&D advisor. All R&D advisors are there to provide the support and also raise the awareness. And that's something that I would suggest everyone has a look and has a health check as well. If you are claiming any of these reliefs, have a health check. Is it as watertight as I would like it to be? Because what you wouldn't want to happen is that HMRC raise an inquiry and then want some of that money back, and that's something that we've always sort of stressed.
But something you've touched on there is obviously that idea that, you know, money can't be, there's that perception that if it's too good, it must be too good to be true, money can't be there for free. Are there sort of other barriers that you've seen with your clients that are like holding them back from, because it looks like there's lots of opportunities there for construction firms to start, you know, releasing some of that trapped cash. What are some of the sort of things holding people back, and how do you think they can overcome them?
In the past, these reliefs have been quite specialised. More recently, some more accountants have gone more into them, but because of that specialist nature, companies have asked their accountants in the past or their advisors, and their advisors have said, we don't believe you qualify, and that's sort of where it stopped. And they haven't then went to get that second opinion from someone else, and that's always definitely in R&D, that's always relevant, because R&D is very subjective, and you would want to get as many opinions as possible. The other area, as I mentioned in the webinar, patents have always been an area whereby people expect you to be making the new Dyson Hoover, whereas it's totally different from that. We can be looking at small elements of designs, we can look at small elements of the construction itself, and patenting those, because those are novel, those are different, and it's a massive, especially for some of our clients, modular building. At the moment, we've got clients patenting modular housing, and therefore if there's an element of the modular housing that's patented, the full house sale will qualify. Or that's the argument, and that's what HMRC are actually taking on. One thing that I did fail to sort of explore as well on land mediation was it's something that's a detriment or a risk to human life, effectively, is what land mediation qualifies for. And what Haynes Watts is exploring, and explore anyone else, is the impact that Grenfell has had on everyone's cladding. Because initially now that is a risk to human life, therefore the cost of stripping the cladding, repurposing the cladding, remediating the cladding, more like, potentially will qualify for remediation costs. Now everyone has got, hopefully is getting access to the fund. It's still pretty hard to get the money out of there, but for the costs that aren't covered by these grants, then you can potentially look to claim land remediation on that as well.
That's really interesting. Matt, did you have anything you wanted to add on those ones?
No, I think the only other thing that tends to people off from time to time is the perception of anything that people perceive to be a tax advantage. I think there is so much historical evidence of people feeling like they've been stung by, you speak to anybody about something that's going to give you a tax credit, or HMRC writing you a check, or getting your tax liabilities down to nothing. People think about old-fashioned schemes like employee benefit trusts and disguised remuneration and all of these type of schemes, and band them all in together. And I think it's just really important to highlight that what you're talking about here are schemes and incentives that are government driven. They people claiming research and development tax credits because they want people driving industry forward and making innovation. They want people to be exploring patent box relief because they want the UK to have, you know, this innovative, forward-thinking design within all of its industries, construction foremost amongst them. So I think that's the only point I would make, in something that I think puts people off unnecessarily. Is it's very easy, to the second that you hear tax reduction or tax incentives, tax schemes to band everything that you've ever heard together. And these are very specific things. One is not like the other.
Yeah, no, perfect. There's one question here that I can answer. Well, a couple of questions here that I can answer, but it's the same question. Yes, everything's available on demand. The slides will be embedded in the presentation that's available on demand. It'll be exactly what you've just watched, but whenever you want to. So it's on the same link that you used to join today. We've just had that come through a few times during the Q&A. We haven't had another one about time limits as to when claims can be submitted for different tax reliefs. Maybe that's something that you could expand on a little bit for people.
I'll pick that up. So in terms of R&D, you have 2 years to go back retrospectively. So if we had a financial year, that is 2 years financial year. If we have a financial year of December, for example, we can go back and do December 20 and December 19, as long as we do that before the end of this financial year. So that's where you get the 2 years retrospective. So if there is potential qualifying projects, that's not an issue. We just have to go back, quantify them, build that in, and resubmit the tax computation. That's why there's a time limit. We've got to redo the tax computation. That's similar with land mediation. We've still got the 2 years to go back and have a look at that. However, as I explained, if it's still sitting in stock, then the time limit goes away, because the time limit is when you actually sell the building or sell the land itself. So there's a bit of a difference there. So if it's in fixed assets, then that's a 2 year window as well. In terms of patent box, it's the year in which it's granted, and then if you miss putting the claim in the year it's granted, you've still got 2 years to go back and do that claim. But as I said, if we put in an application for a patent tomorrow, and these patent attorneys are really it's a good time for the patent attorneys at the minute, because there's that many patent applications going in. They can get them done pretty quickly, but if it goes in end of this week, say, you start accruing the relief from the end of this week, and therefore if you put the claim in 2 years time, or even 4 years time, because you can do the retrospective 2 years amendment, you're going to get all these missed patent pending years in that year of grant. So it's not lost, it's just been accruing. And the cap allowances you claim in the year of which you put your tax return in, and again you can go back and amend if you need to, if you think there's been missed cap allowances. And sorry, just finally, because there's quite a lot to get through there, if you've got a building, you think you've missed cap allowances, or you haven't done a cap allowance claim, you want to do a retrospective cap allowance claim for the special rate pool, then you can do that whenever.
Brilliant. I also just wanted to flag, we've had quite a few quite specific individual circumstance questions come through, which we'll pass over to Matt and Jonathan separately, because it's probably just not quite the right forum for us to get into that. But please do keep sending through your top line questions, because there's some really good ones coming in. I also just wanted to ask, my understanding is there's been some recent changes in the R&D space. Is that right? And if so, could you just run us through what those have been?
Yeah, so in terms of the R&D space, again, it's been publicised, but it hasn't been publicised in construction very well. If anyone wants to have a look at the case, it's online, but it's called the Haddy Engineering case. And the judge ruled that effectively the engineering business was being paid by another business to do their tooling, so their high precision engineering tooling. And under the contract, Haddy Engineering was being subcontracted to do that work. And because of that, even though Haddy Engineering was an SME, it for all intents and purposes and could claim the SME relief, and that's what they did, the judge ruled that because of that contract in place, then they could only claim the RDEC as opposed to SME. And that's one of the rules that is now starting to filter out into software, because software companies get paid sometimes by the hour, and it's how much level of risk is in there. And now it's starting to bleed its way into construction. What does that contract say? What does the D&B design and build contract say? Who's got the risk? Does it look like a subcontract arrangement? If it does, effectively, your SME claim is now going to be an RDEC claim, and all your subcontractors might fall out of there. So it's imperative to get these sorts of things right. And at the outset, it might be a case if you have a split claim, you might have a hybrid of R&D, SME, sorry, and RDEC, just to show that you are thinking about this.
Brilliant. We've also had a question coming in about your point on firms who have accounting periods that straddle the end of the super deduction period, and how that will exactly work with I can't say that word, sorry, proportioning that out, how exactly that will all work.
Yes. So there was, again, coming back to that, so there was some anti-avoidance as well. I did have a couple of clients ring us and say, well, I've signed a contract in March, can I just delay it until April and get the super deduction on it, or before March, sorry. The anti-avoidance is that from the 3rd of March, if you entered into a contract, still can claim the super deduction as long as you have it after April. In terms of the apportionment basis, we have to have a look at that straddle period. So we have to have a look at when was the actual cost incurred. Otherwise, you could have all the costs in the wrong period, and then you're apportioning it. So they're quite hot in terms of that time frame.
We had another question come through really early, so I'm thinking this one probably might be for you, Matt, because it was right near the start that we got this question come in. But it was to do with sort of, why do you sort of think construction firms find themselves in these, trapped cash positions so often? Like, is there a particular reason that firms are so prone to that in this sector?
That's a good question. I don't think there's one specific reason that I could think of. I think what you find, and I'm sure everybody is very, very familiar with it, is construction can often feel like you're on a treadmill that's running faster and faster. You're in this constant situation where you've got site teams employed and no project ever finishes and dovetails beautifully with another one starting. So you tend to find that getting resourcing levels right is difficult. Getting subcontract engagement is difficult. All of these things become hard. And what you tend to find, I think, in construction, maybe not more than any other sector, but certainly it's one of the top ranking ones, is every business feels like it constantly has to be growing. It has to be growing because every time a new project starts before an old one finishes, there's a new site team being taken on. You've got a new PQS, you've got a new project manager, and actually now the team that we were hoping to put there, and they've got nowhere to go. So we've got this constant wheel of having to scale up, to keep running, to keep covering cost base. And I think, if I'm perfectly honest, often it just gets overlooked. I think there is so much involved in the day-to-day of running construction operations that looking at tax treatments, looking at accounting treatments to release that cash can just be lost in the mire, to be honest. I think it's as simple as that in my experience.
Brilliant. Jonathan, did you have anything you wanted to add to that one?
No, I think Matt hit the nail on the head there. It takes time to get everyone's head around these reliefs. It takes time to pull these reliefs together. It takes a good relationship with your advisor as well, for you to trust that what's going in is correct. And all that time is taken away from the day-to-day, and therefore that's why I think it's always on the to-do list.
Brilliant. So we do have a few minutes left, but a lot of these questions we're getting are the specific ones. So I was going to put a call out for any more questions that you think anyone has that they think might appeal to the crowd at large rather than just your personal business. And then also just ask you guys if you had any closing thoughts that you wanted to leave everyone with to give everyone a chance to get their questions in.
Yeah, I mean, I think the closing thought I would offer is, I think echoing something Johnny's just said about needing that relationship with your advisors. And I think it's very, very easy when you get caught up in the day-to-day running the business to not want to take that time to take the step back and sit with somebody, look at the big picture, and actually talk somebody else through who's going to have that technical knowledge, everything that's been going on. And I think that's the one thing that I would consider is those regular meetings with a lot of my clients. We will sit down once a quarter, once every 6 months, just to run through with no agenda, run through what's been going on, what projects are on the table, what are they doing, what are they looking at, who are they employing, almost to take some of the onus off of them so that they're not coming to us and saying, can you make a research and development tax credit claim for me? They're coming to us and saying, this is what we're doing, this is what's happening in our business. For us to say, well, actually it sounds like that fits into that particular box. This is something we need to look at. So I think just that working cohesively with your advisors would be my takeaway.
Brilliant. And Jonathan?
I think from what I've seen work extremely well is getting involved with clients, or clients getting their advisors involved at the very outset. If you're thinking about capital projects, if you're thinking about a new development, speak to the advisor before you actually then commit, because a lot of this work, a lot of this tax relief, a lot of this cash can be factored into those decisions. And if you're appraising 3 or 4 different sites, or 3 or 4 different assets and finance as well, you would always want to have a look at the finance on those as well. Having that input at that outset will create a lot more clarity in terms of the return that you are going to get from what you're putting in, and the sites, certainly on sites that might have looked more beneficial, sometimes fall down the pecking order because of the extra relief that you're going to get.
Brilliant. Okay, well, I might wrap things up there, just because it's a bit, we're getting those specific questions that probably, as I've said, this is not the correct forum for us to delve into those. So I think I'd just like to say a massive thank you to you both for giving us your time today. I think it's been really informative for everyone, given the number of people who are already asking how they can go back and watch it again. I think it's been a real benefit. Also, big thank you to our audience for joining us today. Always great to have everyone involved. Please do feel free to share the link with anyone else you think would find the session interesting. Also, thank you to Haynes Watts for sponsoring today's conversation, because I think it's a really important one for firms to have. Just a little shout out to have a look at the rest of Building Design and Housing Today's events program. That's available on all of our home pages and on our event specific site. We've got lots coming up in the next few months. So we hope some of you can join us for that. I think that's probably about it for now. So thank you and goodbye.
Thanks.